At some point, you have to understand this truth. Explaining your value to someone who keeps overlooking it only teaches them that you'll stay even when you're disrespected. Silence is not weakness. Silence is the first real lesson of value. When you stop reacting, stop chasing, stop correcting, something powerful happens. The noise disappears, and what remains is the weight of your absence. That's when reality begins to speak louder than words ever could. When you were always available, always responding, always fixing things, your presence became predictable. Predictability kills appreciation. She didn't wake up one day and decide to take you for granted. It happened slowly, quietly, because you were always there no matter how little effort was given in return. And every time you explained how you felt, every time you tried to make her understand your worth, you unintentionally sent the message that your value depended on her recognition. That's a dangerous position to put yourself in. Silence changes the rules of the game. Not the kind of silence filled with bitterness or manipulation, but the calm silence of self-respect. The silence that says, I know who I am, and I don't need to prove it. When you pull back your words, your attention, your emotional energy, she starts to feel something unfamiliar, uncertainty. And uncertainty forces reflection. She begins to notice the empty space where your effort used to be. The good morning text that stopped. The emotional support that's no longer instantly available. The comfort of knowing you'd always be there gone. This is where most men fail. They break the silence too early. They rush back to explain, to clarify, to make sure she understands. But understanding doesn't come from words, it comes from experience. She has to feel the difference between life with you, fully present, and life without your constant presence. Silence allows that contrast to exist. It lets the truth rise on its own without you forcing it. And here's the hardest part: silence requires strength. It means resisting the urge to seek validation. It means sitting with discomfort instead of chasing reassurance. It means trusting that your value is real even if no one acknowledges it in that moment. But this strength is exactly what redefines how you're seen. People don't respect what they can always access. They respect what has boundaries. Your silence is not punishment, it's clarity. It's you stepping back and saying, I won't fight to be valued. And in that space, she's left alone with her actions and their consequences. She starts replaying moments she ignored. She starts questioning assumptions she made about your availability. Because when something valuable disappears, its importance becomes undeniable. Whether she realizes it or not is no longer your responsibility. Silence shifts the focus back where it belongs, on you, on your growth, your peace, your standards. And if she truly valued you, the silence will wake her up. If she didn't, the silence will free you. Sometimes the strongest message you can send is no message at all, because absence teaches lessons words never can. There comes a moment when you have to look at your effort honestly and ask yourself a hard question: am I giving from love, or am I giving from fear of being replaced, ignored, or forgotten? Because overgiving doesn't come from strength, it comes from hoping that if you do enough, you'll finally be valued. And the truth is, when you give too much to someone who gives too little, you don't become appreciated, you become expected. When your time, attention, and emotional support are always available, they stop being seen as gifts and start being seen as obligations. You reply instantly. You cancel your plans. You prioritize her needs over your own. Not because she demanded it, but because you believed that sacrifice would secure your place in her life. What it actually did was teach her that your boundaries were flexible and your needs were optional. The more you poured in, the less your effort was noticed. Over-giving quietly destroys attraction, not because caring is wrong, but because imbalance is. When one person gives constantly and the other receives comfortably, respect erodes. She doesn't feel the need to step up, to invest, or to protect what she's being handed for free. And without realizing it, she begins to associate your presence with convenience instead of value. That's not love, that's comfort. Pulling back is not cruelty, it's correction. It's restoring balance where imbalance was tolerated for too long. When you stop over-giving, you force the dynamic to reset. Suddenly, your time is not guaranteed. Your emotional labor is not unlimited. Your presence becomes intentional, not automatic. And that shift is powerful because people protect what they have to earn. This is where guilt tries to creep in. You might feel selfish for choosing yourself. You might worry that stepping back will push her away. But understand this: if reducing your effort causes someone to lose interest, they were never attached to you, they were attached to what you provided. Real connection survives boundaries. Exploitation does not. Over-giving also disconnects you from yourself. You start measuring your worth by how useful you are. You ignore your own exhaustion, your own desires, your own limits. And slowly, you lose the version of yourself that had ambition, confidence, and direction. The irony is, that version of you is what attracted her in the first place. When you give too much, you don't just lose her respect, you lose yourself. When you choose to stop over-giving, you reclaim your power. You teach her without saying a word that your energy is valuable, that your time has weight, that your presence is not something to be taken lightly. And in that space, one of two things will happen. Either she will rise to meet the new standard, or she will fall away. Both outcomes are wins, because they lead you back to alignment. You are not here to prove your worth through exhaustion. You are here to be valued, not used. And the moment you stop giving more than you receive, you begin teaching the most important lesson of all: access to you is earned, not assumed. The shift happens the moment you decide that being respected matters more than being wanted. That decision is quiet, but it's powerful. Self-respect doesn't announce itself, it shows up in what you no longer tolerate. When you stop bending your standards just to keep someone close, the entire dynamic changes. You're no longer trying to be chosen, you're choosing yourself. For a long time, you may have believed that compromise meant shrinking. That being understanding meant staying silent when something hurt. That loyalty meant accepting behavior that slowly chipped away at your dignity. But self-respect begins where excuses end. It begins when you realize that love without respect is just attachment, and attachment will always cost you more than it gives. When you start honoring yourself, your behavior changes naturally. You don't argue to be heard. You don't explain the same boundary twice. You don't chase after emotional breadcrumbs. You walk away from situations that drain you, even if walking away feels uncomfortable at first. And that discomfort is temporary, but the strength it builds is permanent. This is where the real transformation happens. She starts to sense something different. Not because you announced a change, but because your energy shifted. You're calmer, less reactive, more grounded. You're no longer seeking approval in every interaction. That calmness is unsettling to someone who was used to your constant effort. Because when you stop trying to please, you become unpredictable in the best way. You become someone who cannot be controlled by neglect or attention. Self-respect forces clarity. It draws a line between what you accept and what you walk away from. And once that line is drawn, people have to decide how they'll show up. Some will test it. Some will resist it. But those who truly value you will adjust. They will meet you where you stand. Because people don't rise to words, they rise to standards. You may worry that asserting self-respect will make you seem cold or distant. But there is nothing cold about knowing your worth. There is nothing distant about protecting your peace. In fact, self-respect creates deeper connection because it removes resentment from the relationship. You're no longer giving while quietly keeping score. You're giving by choice, not by fear of loss. And here's the truth most people never tell you: when you respect yourself, you become harder to replace. Not because you demand attention, but because you offer something rare: stability, confidence, and integrity. Those qualities can't be faked, and they can't be ignored for long. Even if someone tries, the absence of them becomes noticeable. If she took you for granted before, it wasn't because you lacked value. It was because you allowed access without requiring effort. Self-respect closes that door. It says, I will not stay where I am unseen. And whether she steps up or steps out, you walk forward with your head held high. Because the moment you choose dignity over desperation, you stop being an option, and you become the standard. There is a truth most people only understand after it's too late. Constant presence hides value, but distance reveals it. When you were always there, your effort blended into the background of her life. Your consistency became invisible, not because it lacked meaning, but because it was never at risk of disappearing. And when something feels permanent, the mind stops appreciating it. Distance is not about disappearing out of anger or trying to provoke a reaction. It's about stepping back enough for reality to become clear. When you remove yourself from the equation, even slightly, the dynamic changes. The space you create forces awareness. Suddenly, she notices the quiet where your voice used to be. The absence of your support, your attention, your reliability begins to echo louder than any argument ever could. When you were close, you may have tried to communicate your feelings, your frustrations, your needs. But words only go so far when actions don't change. Distance does what conversations often can't. It shows the cost. It allows her to experience life without the safety net of your presence. And in that experience, truth surfaces naturally. This space also gives you clarity. Being too close for too long can blur your perspective. You start normalizing behavior that shouldn't be normal. You justify neglect. You minimize disrespect. Distance breaks that pattern. It gives you room to see the situation for what it really is, not what you hoped it could become. And with that clarity comes strength. Some people only recognize value once it's no longer immediately accessible. Not because they are cruel, but because comfort dulls awareness. Distance removes comfort. It replaces certainty with uncertainty, and uncertainty forces reflection. She begins to ask questions she never had to ask before. She starts comparing how things feel now versus how they felt when you were fully present. That comparison is the lesson. And here's the part that matters most. You must be willing to accept whatever the distance reveals. If she reaches out with genuine effort, accountability, and change, then distance has done its job. But if she doesn't, then the distance has revealed something equally important, that she valued the convenience, not the connection. Either way, you gain truth, and truth is power. Distance also restores your sense of self. When you're no longer constantly focused on her reactions, moods, and needs, you reconnect with your own life, your goals, your routines, your identity outside of the relationship. You remember that you were whole before you tried to hold everything together, and that wholeness is what grounds you moving forward. It's important to understand that distance isn't a tactic, it's a boundary. A boundary that says, I will not stay where I am unappreciated. And boundaries don't need explanations. They don't need permission. They exist to protect your self-respect and your peace. In the end, presence can be taken for granted, but absence cannot be ignored. And when distance reveals what closeness could not, you finally see the truth clearly, whether she steps forward or fades away. Anger feels powerful in the moment, but it rarely teaches anything lasting. Raised voices, long messages, emotional confrontations, they may release what's inside you, but they don't create understanding or change. In fact, they often do the opposite. They turn the focus away from behavior and place it on emotions. And when that happens, the real lesson is lost. If you truly want someone to understand the weight of their actions, you don't do it with anger. You do it with consequences. For a long time, you may have tried to explain how her behavior affected you. You may have expressed disappointment, frustration, even hurt. But when those words were followed by the same access, the same availability, the same effort, the message became confused. You said you were unhappy, but your actions said you were willing to stay no matter what. Over time, that teaches someone that your feelings are negotiable and your boundaries are temporary. Consequences are different. They don't argue. They don't beg. They don't demand understanding. They simply exist. When behavior changes access, time, or energy, the connection between action and outcome becomes clear. And clarity is what forces growth. When she feels the absence of what she once had not as punishment but as reality, reflection begins. This is where emotional discipline matters. It takes strength to stay calm when you want to react. It takes maturity to hold your ground without trying to control the outcome. You resist the urge to send that long message. You resist the urge to explain one more time. Because deep down you know explanations have already been given. What was missing was follow-through. Letting consequences speak also protects your dignity. Anger can make you say things you don't mean or reveal vulnerabilities to someone who hasn't earned them. Silence and distance, on the other hand, keep your power intact. They allow you to observe instead of react. And observation tells you more about someone than any conversation ever will. When consequences are real, one of two things happens. Either she becomes aware and takes responsibility, or she grows distant and defensive. Both outcomes are information. If she steps up, it's because she recognizes the value of what she was about to lose. If she doesn't, then the consequences have revealed the truth that accountability was never going to come through words alone. It's important to understand that consequences are not revenge. Revenge is driven by ego. Consequences are driven by self-respect. You're not trying to hurt her, you're refusing to hurt yourself. You're choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion. And in doing so, you teach a lesson that doesn't need volume or emotion to be understood. Growth doesn't come from being told what you did wrong again and again. It comes from realizing that certain behaviors cost you something real. And when that realization hits, it stays. Whether it leads to change or closure, it moves you forward. Because in the end, anger fades quickly, but consequences leave an imprint that words never can. The final shift is not about her at all. It's about who you decide to become from this point forward. Everything you've learned, every boundary you've enforced, every moment of silence and distance leads to this evolution. You are no longer reacting to being taken for granted. You are building a version of yourself that cannot be taken lightly again. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's built through consistent choices. You choose standards over convenience. You choose growth over comfort. You choose self-respect even when no one is watching. And over time, these choices shape how the world responds to you. When you move with intention, people feel it. When your life has direction, your presence carries weight. Becoming that man means your time is no longer open-ended. You don't over-explain your absence or apologize for prioritizing your goals. Your schedule reflects your values. Your energy is invested where it's reciprocated. And because you are no longer desperate for connection, the connections you form become stronger, healthier, and more balanced. There is a calm confidence that comes with this shift. You don't need to dominate conversations or demand attention. You listen more. You speak less, but with purpose. Your actions align with your words, and that consistency builds trust. People know where you stand because you don't compromise your core to please anyone. This version of you understands that love is not about chasing, convincing, or proving. It's about mutual effort and respect. You no longer tolerate ambiguity where commitment is required, or neglect where care is expected. And when something doesn't align, you walk away without drama, because you know walking away is sometimes the highest form of self-respect. What's powerful is that this change affects every area of your life, not just relationships. Your discipline improves. Your focus sharpens. Your standards rise in work, friendships, and personal goals. You stop settling across the board. And as your life elevates, so does the caliber of people around you. If she sees this version of you, she will feel the difference immediately. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you're grounded in who you are. And whether she chooses to step into alignment with that version or not becomes irrelevant. Your path no longer depends on her recognition. This is how you ensure you are never taken for granted again, not by demanding respect, but by embodying it. When your life is full, your purpose clear, and your boundaries firm, you become someone people value naturally. Because the man who knows his worth never has to remind anyone of it.